Hello and welcome to an all-new unbiased gear review. Today we are taking a look at the ESP LTD GT-600 Glen Tipton signature model. So first, the specs on the instrument. We have a 3-piece maple neck that is going through a mahogany body. We have a bound ebony fretboard with 24 frets. We have locking LTD branded tuners in back there. We have a Kahler Hybrid style tremolo bridge, which can be set up for either floating or fixed function. And we also have the new Glen Tipton signature model Vengeance pickups from EMG. So as a longtime Judas Priest fan, I've been kind of looking forward to checking one of these things out ever since I saw it at NAMM 2018. I thought it looked pretty dope. I'm very, very fortunate that I got afforded the chance to actually check one of these things out. The first thing you notice, just kind of looking this thing over, is that the finish work is not so bad. There does seem to be some seams that you can see from where two pieces of wood met. That tends to happen a lot with these kind of cheaper gloss style finishes. They just kind of sink in a little bit in certain spots. It's not something that's super noticeable until you get right up close to it, but you can definitely see like there's a seam that goes fully right on down the middle of the body there. Checking over the rest of the finish work, it is not looking too shabby. Besides that, looking at the fretwork is nice and even. At first, I thought that was not the case on this guitar, but then I found that there's a lot more adjustability to the bridge. I'll get into that in a moment, but once I got that set up, I took a look at the fretwork and found that everything is nice and perfectly level on here. Very comfortable playing surface. The fret edges are not so bad. There is, oh, where was it? There was one, right here. One rough fret right here. The 19th fret on the treble side is literally the only sharp end that I was able to find on the whole guitar. Everything else is pretty solid. It's not a super round fret end on this guitar, but it's not bad either. It's definitely not something that you can feel so much. I'm sure if there were any other sharpness or fret tangs that were hanging out, the binding is doing a great job of covering that up. Looking at the locking nut, the locking nut is perfectly flush to the sides of the neck. That's one of those things that kind of in recent memory I've started to kind of notice on a lot of instruments is just kind of a touch that isn't really there on a lot of them. Usually the nut sticks out a little bit or it sticks in a little bit. This one, it is perfectly flush there, so there's no discomfort from hitting that locking nut with your fretting hand. All the appointments are really nice. Love the chrome hardware that's on this. It definitely goes nice with the aesthetic. The brushed aluminum style pickguard. The control layout is something that I don't really care for so much. We've got a single volume and a three-way toggle. But what bothers me about it is the placement of that toggle, especially in relation to the bridge. Pretty much every single time that you go to hit the toggle switch, you end up hitting the whammy bar just by proximity because it's sticking up right here. So you go to hit the toggle switch to pull it up or push it down. This thing is right in your way. I would have loved it if maybe this three-way toggle switch would have been maybe right here. I would have preferred if there was a little bit more thought given to the control layout. So now let's take a minute to talk about this Caylor trem. So now let's take a moment to talk about this Kahler Hybrid bridge that's on here. This thing was probably my first real experience with a Caylor bridge up to this point. I'd owned a guitar with a Caylor 17 years ago, but I owned it for so little a time that I never actually set it up myself, so this was my first foray into that. First of all, I would like to thank Caylor for posting awesome instructional videos on YouTube that explained all the finer working parts, what everything does, what each screw turn actually accomplishes on this thing, because that wisdom proved to be indispensable. I'd also like to really thank their customer service, because when I had an issue with this not staying in tune, I sent them an email and they politely informed me of a few things that I could attempt to make this bridge a little bit more stable, and it worked very nicely. Thank you so much. But what's really cool about this is that you have a lot of adjustability. You have a lot of functionality to all these different screws that are on here. You can adjust the string height. You can adjust the intonation, of course. You can also adjust the string spacing. So in theory, if you wanted to use a guitar that had a regular spaced humbucker in the bridge, you probably could, because you can get these strings very close together, or you can even stretch them much further apart if you've got pickups like these that probably have rail magnets underneath. So that's really cool. You've got a lot of adjustability. The trem itself is cam-based as opposed to a blade-style fulcrum like a Floyd Rose would be. So there's actually internal pieces in here that you can adjust through these different screw holes here, as far as how forward or how far back the cam sits. And because of the design, as you can see, there's no access to it in the back for those of you that have never experienced a Caylor bridge before. It is all top mounted. Now, one thing that's really awesome about this bridge is, like I said, it is a hybrid bridge. So there is a little Allen screw that you can turn right here, that if you turn it all the way in and line up the cam as you're turning it, then you can turn this into a fixed style bridge. What makes it super easy is that if you just lock that sucker down before you change strings, before you do your setup, then it makes it infinitely easier when you undo that. All you have to do is adjust the cam until you get everything back in tune. In theory, like with my experiences with Floyd style bridges, one of the things that Caylor did tell me when I was having an issue with this is that you really do need to make sure that everything is tightened down. You don't want to tighten it so much that you're rounding your tools or that you're stripping the screw heads, but you do want it so that it's at least firm and snug on everything. You don't want anything to move because that's where you lose your tuning stability. Also, a lot of times with these rollers, if these rollers are no longer moving, that is also a problem with your tuning stability as well. But once you get the thing set up, this was actually a pretty solid floating style bridge. So I have to give it to them. The design is really interesting. It's super responsive, almost responsive to a fault. Like, I'm used to playing Floyd style bridges. This thing was way more responsive than any Floyd style bridge I have ever played, but there again, almost to a fault, because it was literally all over the place. You start to understand why a lot of guys that really abuse their whammies tend to go for Caylors, because you can just go back and forth a lot on these things. But that being said, it might be a little bit too much for me. I think I'll stick with the Floyds myself. Moving on to how this guitar sounds, this is where I feel like we are a little bit lackluster on this particular instrument. The neck pickup on these Glenn Tipton signature EMGs doesn't sound so bad. It does have a little bit of a sweetness to it. It does sound pretty okay, like I could see it pairing up nicely with an EMG 81 or an 85 in the bridge. However, the bridge pickup leaves a lot to be desired. For years, Glenn was known for using an EMG 81 in the bridge, which not only was it kind of a hallmark of his tone, but that is basically the foundation upon which a lot of metal and metalcore tone has been built upon. It's not a very versatile pickup, but what it does extremely well, which is that compressed, just fucking solid metal tone where everything is just ever so slightly pushed. This is a little bit different in that it is kind of like a ballless EMG 81. Those palm mutes to me are severely lacking. There's just not a lot of oomph behind them. Chords, not so bad, but to me it just doesn't really cut the way that even an EMG 81 does. You get the picture. It's not a terrible pickup, but if it was a choice between going with these that have ceramic and steel magnets in them for supposedly a more complex tone, I'd much rather go with the kind of bare bones basic tone that the EMG 81 or even a slightly ballsier tone that the EMG 85 has, because I don't know, these just seem like they're lacking a little bit. Like, there's a little bit of articulation there, but there's no real tone to speak of. Just leaves a lot to be desired. So overall, my final thought is this. This is a pretty solidly built instrument, and the final quality control that was done on it is also pretty solid. There are definitely a few things that I think a little bit more R&D should have gone into. The pickups are just lackluster. The placement of the controls is leaving a little bit to be desired with the use of the bridge. Also, I know that Glenn prefers the Caylor bridge, but man, I just find myself playing this just wishing it had a Floyd so much. So I know this is a signature instrument and it's supposed to be built with a lot more input from the artist whose name is on it, but I just kind of feel like that's leaving us with a little bit of a guitar that has something to be desired. It's not a terrible instrument by any stretch of the imagination. It's definitely a good, solid instrument. There's just some things that I would have much rather done differently. So with that, what am I drinking today? Well, today I am having from Monkless Belgian Ales out of Bend, Oregon. I am having their Scheppelkoffegen. Sounds like Cohagen. Cohagen, give these people air. Alright, anyways. Moving on is a Belgian-style wheat beer that is brewed with spices. It is a 5.4% alcohol by volume, which is right around ballpark for a typical wheat beer. Pours a very, very, very light golden color. Again, very typical of Belgian-style wits. Definitely a spiciness in the aroma. Kind of a citrus mixed with like mixed vegetables kind of thing. A little bit of that in the taste too. I think the spices are kind of overpowering each other because I'm not tasting... It's weird, like I'm tasting spiciness, but I'm kind of tasting a nondescript spiciness, for lack of a better way of saying it. It's no, it's just it's solid, it's smooth. Admittedly, maybe a little old in the can. Maybe I should have had this probably a little bit earlier on, but still not bad though. But yeah, it's smooth, it's good. It's not incredible. I've had better Belgian style wits than this, that's for damn sure. But it's still solid, it's still good. So that's all the time I've got. Leave your comment in the comment section below, like and subscribe. If you dig the band that's on my shirt, Priest. If you dig the guitar, and if you dig the beer that I had today, all those links will be in the description below. Find me on all sorts of different platforms, not just YouTube. Find me on Facebook. Find me on Twitch, find me on Patreon, find me on Untapped. I'm kind of all over the place these days. Many more videos to come.